Sure. So I think India-China ties is an issue that's often overlooked. It's overshadowed by the more obvious geopolitical threats right now. So for example, US-China trade dominates. US talks with South Korea or North Korea dominate. The situation in Venezuela is front and center. But I think a lot of times what's happening between India-China and the trajectory of India-China relations is overlooked, but it's extremely consequential. And it's something I refer to as the potential next coming of a Cold War. So if we think about the first Cold War, the hallmark traits of it were two countries, the US and Soviet Union, battling each other for supremacy, oftentimes not directly, but in third countries as proxies. And economic engagement was a huge foray for how they were engaging one another. And you're seeing something similar transpire with India and China. So for example, the two countries are very much battling each other, not at the border, but in other neighboring countries throughout Asia. So if we look at Sri Lanka used to be an Indian ally for many years. In the 2000s, it began to pivot closer to China, primarily because the Indian government was just not investing in Sri Lanka in the way they wanted. So the Sri Lankans turned to China. Some of these projects did not work out, the most famous being the port of Hambantota. There's some genuine concerns that this newly bankrupt port would fall into the hands of the Chinese government and potentially be used as a Chinese naval asset. So a lot of countries put pressure on Sri Lanka to ameliorate the terms of the restructuring. But the point being that there was a very real fight being played out, and India got involved and helped finance the opposition parties, presumably, to help sway the 2015 election. Something similar happened in Maldives. The Chinese are very much invested in Pakistan, which bothers India. So India, in turn, is investing heavily in Iran, in other countries that are not friendly towards China, like Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan. So the point of all this is that these two countries are not fighting each other directly, but they are fighting each other for influence throughout the Asian region. And a lot of this is being spearheaded or led by economic and financial engagement. So the question or concern that I want to pose is, when looking at assets and investments throughout Asia, it's not only a matter of looking at the balance sheet or the projections of some of these projects, but also thinking about the broader story. And are these projects or investments or assets being furthered because of geopolitical interests? And that might be fine if they are, but it's a key consideration that needs to be asked when anyone is looking at investments in the region. So interestingly, unlike the first one, this is not a matter of capitalism versus communism, because you could say, yes, China is officially a communist state, whereas India is not, and India is still socialist light. They're not fully capitalist either. So unlike the first Cold War, this is not a matter of two very starkly different economic ideologies going head to head. Instead, it's a matter of using economic engagement to just have hegemony in the region. So to caveat that slightly, India has been very clear. What they've said is they don't really have any interest in furthering their power beyond Asia. They just want to protect South Asia or view the Indian Ocean as their backwater. China, on the other hand, has unofficially expressed that they want to have greater dominance throughout Asia, if not the world. So it's really a fight of dominance. India, like the U.S. with the Western Hemisphere, just doesn't want a foreign power, specifically a foreign adversary, to have greater influence in an area that they deem to be their own. So I wouldn't really characterize it as, again, capitalism versus communism. It's more about just stay out of our area, each one is saying to the other, and we're going to use economic and financial engagement to further this interest of ours.